Welcome, fellow theorists and dreamers, to the twilight realm where speculation meets slumber. Tonight, we venture into the mysterious depths of Hawkins' final chapter, exploring every theory that could shape the conclusion of Stranger Things. From the shadows of Vecna's memory palace to the secrets behind flesh walls, from Will's awakening powers to love's triumph over darkness, we'll traverse every possibility with the gentle rhythm of bedtime contemplation. So settle into your favorite spot. Let your mind drift like particles floating between dimensions, and allow these theories to carry you into peaceful dreams as we explore what might await in the final volume of our beloved series. The phenomenon that has captured Max Mayfield exists in a space that defies conventional understanding of life and death, consciousness and void. When Vecna's clawed fingers snapped her limbs, and darkness claimed her vision in those final moments of Season 4, something unprecedented occurred in the mythology of Hawkins' supernatural landscape. Death, for Max, was not the end but a doorway into a realm that scholars of dimensional theory might call a psychic archive, the preserved memories of Henry Creel himself. Max's physical form lies motionless in the sterile confines of Hawkins Hospital, machines monitoring the shallow rise and fall of her chest, her eyes closed to a world she can no longer see. But consciousness, that mysterious spark that makes us who we are, had found refuge in the most unlikely sanctuary, within the mind of her would-be destroyer. When Eleven searched for her friend in that familiar psychic void where lost souls might wander, she found nothing. The darkness that greeted her was complete and absolute, offering no trace of the girl who had sacrificed herself to save Hawkins. This absence speaks to something profound about the nature of Vecna's consumption. When Dr. Brenner explained that Vecna's victims are not simply killed, but consumed, absorbed into his being where they remain conscious and aware, he was describing a fate perhaps worse than death, eternal imprisonment within the mind of a cosmic predator. But Max's situation differs from those who came before her. Her brief return to life, that precious minute when Lucas's desperate CPR brought air back to her lungs and rhythm back to her heart, created a unique circumstance in the supernatural ecosystem of the Upside Down. She exists now in two states simultaneously, a quantum consciousness split between the hospital bed where Lucas keeps vigil and the memory palace where Henry Creel's past unfolds like scenes from a film reel that never stops turning. This duality explains the confusion that will greet Holly Wheeler when she asks how Max can be in two places at once. The question itself reveals the inadequacy of human language to describe phenomena that transcend our understanding of space and time, consciousness and reality. The memory world that Max now inhabits is not the twisted hellscape of the Upside Down with its floating particles and decay, but something far more intimate and revealing. Here, in the preserved recollections of a man who became a monster, the past remains vivid and accessible. The memories flow like water, carrying with them the emotional weight of experiences that shaped Henry Creel from troubled child to interdimensional entity. Each scene is preserved with perfect clarity, from the mundane details of daily life to the pivotal moments that altered the trajectory of his existence. Holly Wheeler's arrival in this memory realm marks a new chapter in Vecna's methodology, a departure from his established pattern that has left even Mike Wheeler puzzled by the change in his sister's captor. Where once Vecna appeared to his victims in his true form, the skeletal, burned creature of nightmare that haunts the darkest corners of the Upside Down, now he presents himself as Henry Creel, the young man in an aristocratic suit whose expressions carry echoes of lost humanity rather than pure malevolence. This transformation in approach suggests something deeper at work in Vecna's psyche, a regression to an earlier state of being that may indicate internal conflict or strategic calculation. The choice to appear as Henry rather than the monster he became implies a desire for connection, for understanding, or perhaps for redemption that complicates our understanding of his motivations. When he warns children about monsters rather than simply claiming them as victims, we witness a behavior that contradicts everything we thought we knew about his nature. The memory that terrifies Henry Creel above all others lies buried in the caves of 1947 Nevada, where a curious child's exploration led to an encounter that would reshape reality itself. These caverns, carved from red rock and shadow, hold secrets that predate Hawkins' laboratory by decades, connecting to experiments that the United States government conducted in pursuit of weaponizing the impossible. The Philadelphia experiment, that legendary attempt at teleportation that supposedly vanished a naval destroyer from the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, left remnants of its technology scattered in hidden places across the American Southwest. Young Henry Creel stumbled upon these remnants during a childhood adventure that began as innocent exploration and ended as cosmic horror. The equipment he discovered, abandoned and partially functional, operated on principles that human science was only beginning to glimpse. When activated by a child's curious touch, it tore open a doorway not to the upside down that we know, but to something far more ancient and alien. Dimension X, the primordial realm, where the Mind Flayer has waited since before human civilization painted its first cave walls. The 12 hours that Henry spent in Dimension X, the same duration that Will Byers would later spend missing in the Upside Down, fundamentally altered his biology in ways that would not become apparent until years later. He returned to our dimension changed, his blood type different, his nervous system rewired to accommodate abilities that no human was meant to possess. But more significantly, he returned as a carrier, infected with something that would lie dormant within him until stress and adolescence created the perfect conditions for its awakening. The shadow that Henry brought back from Dimension X was not merely a psychic parasite, but something far more sophisticated. A fragment of a cosmic intelligence that had been waiting eons for a suitable host. The Mind Flayer, that vast and ancient entity whose tendrils reach across dimensions, found in young Henry Creel the perfect vessel for its earthly manifestations. The infection was subtle at first, manifesting as enhanced intuition and inexplicable knowledge, but it grew stronger as Henry aged, feeding on his isolation and nurturing the darkness that would eventually consume his humanity entirely. This revelation recontextualizes everything we thought we understood about Henry Creel's transformation into Vecna. Rather than a natural-born psychopath who chose evil, we see a victim of cosmic circumstance, a child whose curiosity led him into contact with forces beyond human comprehension. The government's experiments, the family tragedies, the methodical development of his powers, all of it becomes part of a larger design, orchestrated by an intelligence that plays games on timescales measured in millennia rather than years. The memories that Max can access in this psychic archive include glimpses of Henry's life before the infection took hold, moments of genuine humanity that survived even as the Mind Flayer's influence grew stronger. She witnesses scenes from 1959 Hawkins High School, where a young Joyce Maldonado hands out flyers for the school's production of Oklahoma, her smile bright with the optimism of youth who believe the world holds nothing but possibility. These memory fragments reveal connections that span decades, weaving together the lives of people who would later become central to Hawkins' supernatural crisis. The drama department's production, initially planned as the safe and traditional Oklahoma, becomes instead the more controversial Dark of the Moon under Joyce's direction. This southern gothic tale of a witch boy who falls in love with a human girl serves as an eerie prophecy of Henry's own story art reflecting the supernatural reality that was already beginning to take shape in the shadows of small-town America. Henry Creel's participation in this production, his face visible on the advertisement that Joyce distributes, represents perhaps the last moment of his normal human existence. The boy who auditioned for the role of the Witch Boy could not have known that he was already becoming the very monster he pretended to be on stage. His performance would be remembered by those who witnessed it as remarkably convincing, though none would understand until much later that what they were seeing was not acting, but the first visible signs of his transformation. The memory world also preserves other faces that will become familiar to those who study Hawkins' history. Steve Harrington's father, a young Jim Hopper, Karen Childress, who will marry and become Karen Wheeler, Patty Newby, whose connection to the Newby family will prove significant, Alan Munson, who will father Eddie, and Ted Wheeler, whose future children will become central to the final battle against the darkness his classmate has become. November 6th, 1959 marks the date of this production, the same November 6th that will echo through time to become the most significant date in Stranger Things mythology. The choice of this specific date for the memory sequence is not coincidental, but reflects the Mind Flayer's understanding of temporal significance, its ability to weave patterns across decades that serve its ultimate purpose. November 6th, 1983, when Eleven made first contact with the Demogorgon and Will Byers vanished into the Upside Down, represents not the beginning of the supernatural crisis, but its culmination, the moment when seeds planted decades earlier finally bore their terrible fruit. Max's plan for escape from this memory prison relies on her growing understanding of how consciousness moves between dimensions, how emotional connections create bridges that transcend physical space. She has observed that music, particularly the Kate Bush cassette that saved her before, acts as a tether to the living world, a frequency that resonates across dimensional barriers to pull trapped souls back toward the light. But the plan she formulates requires Holly's cooperation and trust, asking the young girl to return to Henry's memories and pretend that everything is normal while working behind the scenes to coordinate their escape. The complexity of this strategy reflects Max's evolution from impulsive teenager to tactical thinker, someone who has learned to navigate the supernatural landscape with the same determination she once brought to arcade games and skateboarding. She understands that direct confrontation with Vecna is impossible in his own memory realm, but deception and misdirection might create opportunities for freedom that brute force could never achieve. The other children who have been captured by Vecna, those whose bodies now hang suspended in the spires of Dimension X that will glimpsed in his terrifying vision, will soon find themselves in similar circumstances as Holly and Max. Unlike Max, whose consciousness was split between life and death, these children are fully claimed by Vecna's power, their physical forms held in dimensional suspension, while their minds are processed through the memory archive. Holly's mission becomes not just her own escape, but the coordination of a larger resistance movement among the captured children. This imprisoned community of young minds represents both hope and horror. Hope because their combined will might prove stronger than Vecna's individual control over each of them. Horror because their situation demonstrates the scope of the entity's ambitions for humanity. These children are not random victims, but carefully selected candidates for something larger, their innocence and potential, making them ideal vessels for whatever transformation Vecna has planned. The memory world serves another crucial function in the larger narrative. It preserves the testimony of Henry Creel's humanity for those who might need to understand the difference between the man and the monster. Max's observations of his fear, his reluctance to enter certain memories, and his desperate attempts to communicate warnings rather than threats suggest that some fragment of his original personality survives within the cosmic horror he has become. This possibility opens pathways for redemption, or at least understanding that could prove crucial in the final confrontation. The bridge that music creates between the memory world and reality operates on principles that science is only beginning to understand. Sound waves, particularly those with strong emotional associations, carry information across dimensional barriers in ways that pure thought cannot. Max's experience with Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill demonstrated this phenomenon, but Holly's connection to Tiffany and other 80s pop music suggests that the specific song matters less than the emotional resonance it creates in the listener's mind. The mechanism of musical rescue works because memories attached to beloved songs create neural pathways that transcend dimensional boundaries. When Max hears the opening notes of her favorite song, her consciousness follows those neural pathways like a map leading home, pulling her awareness back toward the world of the living even when her body lies trapped in supernatural circumstances. This discovery has implications that extend far beyond individual rescue attempts, suggesting methods for disrupting Vecna's control on a larger scale. The Memory Palace also contains echoes of other victims who have been consumed by Vecna's hunger over the decades. Barb Holland's consciousness may still wander these preserved recollections, along with Billy Hargrove and countless others whose deaths fed the entity's growing power. The possibility of encountering these lost souls adds both hope and tragedy to Max and Holly's situation. Hope because they would not be alone in their imprisonment, tragedy because it confirms the scope of suffering that Vecna has inflicted across the years. The question of whether these consumed victims can be saved or if they are doomed to eternal imprisonment depends largely on the nature of consciousness itself and whether the bonds that tie souls to their bodies can be restored after such fundamental violation. Max's unique situation, existing simultaneously in the memory world and the living realm, may provide clues about how such rescues might be accomplished, but the cost and complexity of such operations remain unknown. As Holly Wheeler prepares to implement Max's plan, returning to Henry's memories to play the role of compliant victim while secretly organizing resistance among the captured children, she steps into a responsibility that no child should bear. Her courage in facing this challenge reflects the strength that runs through the Wheeler family, the same determination that drives Mike's leadership and Nancy's investigative spirit. But it also marks her transition from protected, innocent, to active participant in the supernatural war that has consumed her town. The memory world awaits their next move with the patience of preserved time, each scene ready to unfold its secrets to those brave enough to witness the transformation of Henry Creel from victim to monster. In these halls of recollection, where the past never fades and every emotion remains fresh as the moment it was first felt, Max and Holly must navigate not just the geography of memory but the psychology of trauma, seeking paths to freedom through landscapes of preserved pain and forgotten hope. The transformation that Will Byers has undergone since his first encounter with the Upside Down represents perhaps the most complex evolution of any character in the Stranger Things mythology. What began as victimization has slowly metamorphosed into something far more nuanced, a symbiotic relationship with forces that exist beyond the boundaries of human understanding. The boy who was once helpless prey has discovered within himself the capacity to become predator, though the cost of this transformation threatens to reshape not just his abilities but his very soul. Will's connection to Vecna operates through mechanisms that transcend simple psychic ability, functioning more like a biological antenna that receives signals from across dimensional barriers. This connection, forged during those 12 hours he spent in the Upside Down in 1983, created permanent alterations in his neural pathways that allow him to perceive the hive mind's activities with startling clarity. Where other characters must strain to sense supernatural presences, Will experiences them with the involuntary intensity of someone receiving a radio transmission directly into their consciousness. The sensation that Will describes as feeling Vecna touching the back of his neck represents more than metaphorical awareness. It is the physical manifestation of interdimensional connection, the hive mind's influence registering in his nervous system like phantom limbs that exist in other realities. These goosebumps that race across his skin serve as early warning systems, alerting him to supernatural activity long before it becomes visible to others. But they also represent a form of violation, the uninvited touch of an entity that has claimed a piece of his identity, whether he consents or not. The flashback that opens Season 5, returning us to Will's first encounter with Vecna in 1983, illuminates the origin of this connection with new understanding. What seemed at the time like random predation now reveals itself as careful selection, Vecna choosing Will not despite his vulnerability, but because of it. The entity saw in this lonely, artistic child the perfect candidate for long-term cultivation, someone whose isolation and sensitivity would make him susceptible to influence, while his inherent goodness would serve as a useful disguise for darker purposes. This realization casts Will's entire journey in a different light, transforming his recovery from victim to survivor into something more troubling. The story of a boy who escaped one trap only to discover he had been placed in a larger one. Every moment of healing, every step toward normalcy, every attempt to reclaim his life has occurred under the watchful influence of forces that view him not as a person, but as a long-term investment in their cosmic agenda. The abilities that manifest in Will during the final episode of Volume 1 represent the fruition of years of careful conditioning, the hive mind's patient work finally bearing fruit when circumstances align to unlock his true potential. When he extends his consciousness into the demogorgons that threaten his friends, taking control of creatures that once terrorized him, we witness the completion of a transformation that began the moment he first vanished from Hawkins Middle School. The control he exerts over these creatures flows through neural pathways that mirror Vecna's own connection to the hive mind, suggesting that Will's powers are not entirely his own, but represent a sharing of capabilities with the entity that first claimed him. This shared consciousness explains why he can see through the eyes of demogorgons, why he can sense Vecna's next targets, and why his prescient abilities seem to grow stronger as the supernatural crisis intensifies around Hawkins. Robin Buckley's role in Will's journey towards self-acceptance proves crucial not just for his emotional development, but for his supernatural evolution. Her wisdom about the liberating power of embracing one's true identity provides Will with the psychological framework he needs to channel abilities that might otherwise consume him. When she speaks of the weight lifting from her shoulders after she stopped being afraid of who she was, she offers Will a model for how authenticity can become strength rather than vulnerability. The conversation they share about unrequited love carries layers of meaning that extend beyond simple romantic counseling. Robin recognizes in Will's struggle with his feelings for Mike Wheeler the same pattern of self-denial that once kept her trapped in isolation and fear. Her advice about finding answers within himself rather than in external validation speaks directly to the supernatural challenges he faces, the need to claim ownership of abilities that others might view as monstrous rather than allowing them to be defined by fear or shame. This internal work of self-acceptance creates the psychological conditions necessary for Will to control powers that operate through will and intention rather than mere technique. Unlike Eleven's abilities, which require physical effort and often result in nosebleeds and exhaustion, Will's connection to the hive mind flows through emotional channels that respond to authenticity and self-knowledge. The moment he stops fighting who he is becomes the moment he can fully access what he has become. The distinction between wizard and sorcerer that Mike makes in their Dungeons and Dragons context illuminates the fundamental nature of Will's abilities. Where wizards study spellbooks and learn techniques from external sources, sorcerers possess innate magical abilities that flow from their essential nature. Will's powers come not from training or practice, but from the dimensional infection that has become part of his biological identity, making him a sorcerer in the truest sense of the fantasy archetype. This internal source of power explains why Will's abilities manifest differently from those of other psychic children in the Hawkins universe. While Eleven and Carly's powers were artificially induced through laboratory experimentation and can be measured and analyzed through scientific methods, Will's capabilities emerge from a symbiotic relationship with cosmic forces that operate beyond human understanding. His magic is personal and intuitive, responding to emotional states and psychological conditions rather than conscious technique. The painting that Will creates, depicting 12 spires rising from some otherworldly landscape, serves as both artistic expression and prophetic vision. The image emerges from his subconscious during moments when his connection to the hive mind grows strongest, allowing him glimpses of Vecna's master plan that exist beyond normal perception. 4 of the spires already hold captured children, suggesting that 8 more victims remain to complete whatever ritual or transformation Vecna has planned. The number 12 carries symbolic weight that resonates through multiple levels of meaning in the Stranger Things mythology. The 12 hours on Vecna's grandfather clock represent the cyclical nature of time and the supernatural entity's relationship to temporal manipulation. The potential existence of 12 experimental subjects in Dr. Brenner's program suggests a completion of the Psychic Children project that began with 11. Most significantly, the biblical parallel of Jesus and his 12 disciples implies that Vecna intends to create a following of transformed children who will serve as vessels for his consciousness as he expands his influence beyond Hawkins. Will's vision of the children suspended in these spires reveals the scope of Vecna's ambition while highlighting his own unique role in the cosmic hierarchy. Unlike the captured children who hang helpless in dimensional suspension, Will remains free to move between worlds, suggesting that his purpose differs from those marked for transformation. He serves not as future vessel, but as current antenna, his consciousness bridging dimensions to provide Vecna with intelligence about the living world, while simultaneously offering resistance fighters glimpses of the entity's plans. The question of why Vecna allows Will to live when he could easily eliminate this potential threat reveals the complexity of their relationship and the entity's long-term strategic thinking. Will's continued existence serves multiple purposes that make his survival more valuable than his death would be. As a living connection to the hive mind, he provides Vecna with ongoing access to information about the activities and plans of those who oppose him. As a former victim who has developed supernatural abilities, he serves as proof of concept for the transformations Vecna plans to inflict on humanity. Most importantly, as someone who bridges the gap between human and inhuman consciousness, he may be the key to Vecna's ultimate goal of merging dimensions. The Harry Potter parallel that some observers have noted, the connection between protagonist and antagonist that means neither can live while the other survives, adds another layer to Will's situation. If his consciousness has become genuinely intertwined with Vecna's through years of hive mind exposure, then killing the entity might prove impossible, without also destroying the boy who carries part of its essence. This biological connection creates strategic complications for those planning Vecna's defeat while offering potential leverage for negotiation or misdirection. Will's artistic nature, his sensitivity and creativity, makes him an ideal candidate for the kind of long-term cultivation that Vecna has pursued. Artists and dreamers have always been susceptible to influence from forces that exist beyond ordinary perception. their minds naturally attuned to subtleties and patterns that escape more literal thinkers. Vecna recognized these qualities in Will from their first encounter, seeing in him not just a victim but a potential protege who might someday serve as ambassador between human and inhuman consciousness. The entity's comment that Will was chosen because he was weak reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of the boy's true nature. What Vecna interpreted as weakness, Will's sensitivity, his emotional openness, his capacity for empathy, actually represents forms of strength that the entity cannot fully comprehend. These qualities that made Will vulnerable to initial capture also make him capable of resistance that purely logical or aggressive opponents could never mount. The nosebleed that Will experiences when using his powers mirrors Eleven's physical symptoms but may indicate something different about the source and nature of his abilities. While Eleven's nosebleeds result from the strain of channeling psychic energy through neural pathways that were artificially enhanced, Will's bleeding suggests that his powers operate through biological systems that are still adapting to supernatural demands. His body is literally changing to accommodate abilities that were never meant to exist in human form. This ongoing transformation explains why Will's connection to the hive mind continues to strengthen over time rather than fading as distance and healing might suggest. Each use of his powers deepens the biological integration between his consciousness and the dimensional entities that first claimed him. The particles that Dustin theorizes Will receives, like radio waves, are not simply information but actual matter that becomes incorporated into his cellular structure with each supernatural contact. The hybrid nature of Will's existence, part human, part dimensional entity, makes him uniquely qualified to understand both perspectives in the coming conflict. He retains enough humanity to feel empathy and moral responsibility, but possesses enough inhuman awareness to comprehend the cosmic scope of the threat facing Earth. This dual nature positions him as potential translator or mediator between species, though the psychological cost of maintaining such a position threatens to tear his identity apart. The moment when Will embraces his connection to Vecna and uses similar powers to destroy the Demogorgons represents a crucial turning point in his character development. For the first time, he chooses to actively engage with abilities he has previously feared and resisted, accepting the darkness within himself as a tool that can serve the light. This decision marks his evolution from passive victim to active participant in the supernatural war, though it also represents the first step down a path that could lead to his complete transformation into something no longer recognizably human. The clouding of his eyes during this display of power serves as a visual reminder that using these abilities comes with a cost. Each time Will channels the hive mind's energy, he risks losing more of his individual identity to the collective consciousness that created his powers. The confident expression that Robin's encouragement helped nurture may reflect growing self-acceptance, but it could equally indicate the emergence of something else wearing Will's face. The gradual replacement of the boy with the entity that has been cultivating him for years. The castle that Will and Jonathan built together, preserved forever in the Upside Down's frozen timeline, represents both the innocence he has lost and the foundation he might return to if redemption remains possible. This fortress of childhood imagination, constructed from love between brothers, stands as a monument to the person Will was before supernatural forces claimed him. Whether he can find his way back to that essential self, or whether the castle will become a memorial to a boy who no longer exists, remains one of the most poignant questions facing the series' conclusion. The love that Will feels for Mike Wheeler, unrequited and complicated by circumstances beyond their control, may prove to be either his salvation or his downfall. Unrequited love has historically served as motivation for some of fiction's greatest villains, the pain of rejection twisted into desire for revenge or power. but it has also inspired some of literature's most noble sacrifices. The purity of selfless affection, transcending personal desire to protect the beloved, regardless of reciprocation. Will's journey toward fully embracing his sorcerer identity reflects the larger theme of adolescence as a time of discovering who we truly are beneath the expectations and assumptions of others. His supernatural abilities serve as metaphor for all the ways that young people develop capabilities and perspectives that their families and communities struggle to understand or accept. The question of whether he will use these emerging powers for creation or destruction depends largely on whether the world around him can offer the love and acceptance necessary to anchor his humanity. The final confrontation that awaits Will may not be with Vecna, but with himself. The choice between embracing the inhuman power that offers cosmic significance and clinging to the human connections that provide meaning on a smaller, but more authentic scale. This internal battle will determine not just his personal fate, but potentially the outcome of the larger war between dimensions, as the boy who bridges both worlds must decide which one deserves his ultimate loyalty. In the quiet moments between supernatural crises, Will Byers remains recognizably the sensitive, artistic child who disappeared from a game of Dungeons and Dragons so many seasons ago. But in the spaces behind his eyes, ancient intelligences stir with patient hunger, waiting for the moment when his human restraints finally give way to the cosmic purpose they have been nurturing since that first night when the lights went out and everything changed forever. The giant flesh wall that encircles Hawkins represents perhaps the most enigmatic and disturbing manifestation of supernatural architecture in the entire Stranger Things mythology. Rising from the corrupted earth of the Upside Down like a monument to cosmic horror, this organic barrier defies conventional understanding of both biology and physics. Its surface writhes with a life that seems both ancient and alien, pulsing with rhythms that suggest a heartbeat measured on geological timescales rather than human ones. Dustin Henderson's mathematical analysis of the wall's structure reveals its perfect circular nature, a geometric precision that speaks to intelligent design rather than random growth. Using principles learned in algebra class, he calculates that the circumference describes a perfect circle, with Hawkins National Laboratory positioned at its exact center. This positioning cannot be coincidental. The laboratory that served as the birthplace of the supernatural crisis now sits like the pupil of a vast eye, protected and concealed by the organic ramparts that surround it. The wall's composition defies easy categorization, appearing to be constructed from the same organic material that lines the tunnels of the Upside Down, but organized into a structure of unprecedented scale and complexity. Its surface bears similarities to the biomechanical aesthetics that H.R. Geiger made famous, combining the organic curves of living tissue with the harsh functionality of engineered architecture. The material seems to breathe, expanding and contracting in slow cycles that suggest either respiration or perhaps the pulse of some vast circulatory system. When Hopper drove his knife into the wall's surface during their first encounter, the blade failed to penetrate more than a few inches despite his considerable strength and the sharpness of military-grade steel. The material possesses a resilience that exceeds anything found in Earth's natural biological systems, suggesting either evolutionary adaptation to extreme conditions or artificial enhancement through processes that transcend conventional biotechnology. The wall's ability to withstand both physical assault and the collision of motor vehicles indicates structural integrity that rivals reinforced concrete, while maintaining the flexibility of living tissue. The government soldiers' casual interaction with the wall, particularly the scene of one operative urinating against its base, reveals a familiarity that contradicts their official mission statements about containing and studying the supernatural threat. Their behavior suggests not the caution of researchers encountering unknown phenomena, but the routine indifference of personnel who understand the wall's true purpose and know it poses no threat to authorized individuals. This comfort level implies either extensive prior contact with the structure or knowledge of its artificial origins that would explain its predictable behavior patterns. 11's instinct that the soldier's casual behavior held significance demonstrates her intuitive understanding of deception and misdirection, skills honed through years of surviving, in environments where truth was a luxury that adults rarely shared with children. Her insistence that they should interrogate the soldier reflects not just curiosity, but recognition that his actions revealed information about the wall's nature that contradicted the military's public narrative about their activities in the Upside Down. The wall serves multiple functions within the broader supernatural ecosystem of Hawkins, operating simultaneously as fortress, camouflage, and construction barrier. Like scaffolding around a building project, it conceals work in progress while protecting that work from interference by unauthorized observers. The perfect circle it describes creates a controlled environment where sensitive operations can proceed without the chaotic interference of Demogorgon attacks or dimensional instabilities that plague other areas of the Upside Down. The absence of Demogorgon attacks within the wall's perimeter provides crucial evidence about its true nature and purpose. These predatory creatures, which hunt with relentless aggression throughout other regions of the alternate dimension, avoid the encircled area with an avoidance pattern that suggests either trained behavior or biological programming. Their respect for boundaries they cannot see or physically interact with indicates the wall's influence extends beyond its visible structure into realms of psychic or pheromonal communication that affect creature behavior on a fundamental level. Mr. Clarke's physics lessons about wormholes and dimensional travel provide the theoretical framework necessary to understand what might be under construction behind the wall's protective barrier. His demonstration using a paper plate to illustrate how a tunnel within a wormhole connects separate dimensions offers a simplified but accurate model for the kind of interdimensional infrastructure that advanced civilizations might too construct to facilitate travel between distant points in space and time. The Einstein-Rosen bridge diagram visible on Mr. Clarke's chalkboard during Erica's class represents the mathematical formalization of wormhole theory, describing the geometric properties of space-time tunnels that could theoretically allow instantaneous travel across vast distances. The placement of this educational content within the narrative structure suggests its direct relevance to understanding Vecna's master plan and the construction project concealed behind the flesh wall. The concept of a permanent tunnel connecting Dimension X to Earth through the Upside Down represents the logical culmination of the supernatural crisis that began with 11's first contact with the Demogorgon. That initial breach created a temporary connection between dimensions, but a permanent tunnel would establish a highway for interdimensional invasion that could transport armies of creatures directly from their alien homeworld to strategic points within human civilization. Hawkins National Laboratory's position at the center of this construction project reflects both its historical significance as the site of the original Mother Gate and its practical advantages as an interdimensional hub. The facility's underground complexes, designed to contain supernatural phenomena, could be repurposed as terminus stations for a wormhole network that extends across multiple dimensions. Its remote location and existing security infrastructure make it an ideal staging ground for operations that require absolute secrecy and maximum operational security. The Mother Gate that 11 accidentally created during her psychic contact with the Demogorgon established the initial connection between our dimension and the Upside Down. but this portal was relatively small and unstable, requiring constant maintenance, and eventually closing when the Mind Flayer's influence was temporarily severed. A permanent wormhole would solve these stability problems while providing the capacity for large-scale transportation that temporary rifts could never accommodate. The Mind Flayer's ancient intelligence would recognize the strategic advantages of establishing permanent infrastructure rather than relying on temporary breaches that could be sealed or disrupted by human interference. A tunnel system connecting multiple dimensions would provide redundancy and flexibility that temporary portals could never offer, allowing the entity to maintain contact with its various projects, even if individual connection points were compromised or destroyed. The construction timeline for such a project would necessarily span years or decades, requiring careful preparation of materials, precise calculation of dimensional coordinates, and gradual modification of local space-time geometry to accommodate the massive energies involved in permanent portal creation. The wall's appearance during Season 5 suggests that this construction project has reached a critical phase where concealment becomes essential to prevent interference during the most delicate stages of assembly. Vecna's role in this construction project may be less as architect and more as foreman, his psychic abilities providing the fine control necessary to manipulate matter and energy at the quantum level, while the Mind Flayer's vast intelligence handles the theoretical calculations and strategic planning. This division of labor would explain how a being who was originally human could participate in engineering projects that require understanding of physics principles that Earth's greatest scientists are only beginning to glimpse. The organic nature of the wall itself suggests construction techniques that blend biological and mechanical approaches, using living matter that can grow and adapt, rather than inorganic materials that would require conventional engineering and maintenance. This biomechanical approach to megascale construction offers advantages in terms of self-repair, adaptation to local conditions, and integration with existing biological systems that purely artificial structures could never achieve. The circular design of the wall may reflect more than simple geometric efficiency, incorporating principles of sacred geometry and dimensional harmonics that affect the flow of interdimensional energies. Circles and spheres possess special properties in both mathematics and mysticism, serving as symbols of completion and perfection, while also describing the most efficient shapes for containing or focusing various forms of energy. The wall's impermeability to human weapons and vehicles may result from its connection to dimensional forces that operate according to different physical laws than those governing normal matter. Materials that exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions could exhibit properties that seem impossible from a single-dimensional perspective, possessing density and resilience that exceed anything achievable through conventional physics. The pulsing rhythms observable in the wall's surface might synchronize with dimensional cycles or energy flows that occur on timescales far longer than human biological processes. These slow pulses could represent the circulation of exotic matter through the structure's internal systems, or perhaps the resonance patterns necessary to maintain stable connections across dimensional boundaries. The government's apparent cooperation with or capitulation to the wall's existence raises disturbing questions about the extent to which human authorities have been compromised by supernatural influence. The ease with which military personnel operate within the wall's perimeter suggests either extensive negotiation with inhuman forces or complete subordination to alien agendas that prioritize interdimensional politics over human forces. Welfare. Dr. K's experiments with Kali may represent attempts to develop countermeasures against the wall, or to create alternative means of accessing the construction site without alerting its guardians. Kali's illusion-generating abilities could theoretically be used to disguise human activities from supernatural surveillance systems, though the risks of such deception would be enormous given the consequences of discovery by entities capable of casual reality manipulation. The Tesseract theories that emerge from careful analysis of the wall's function suggest that the completed construction project might not be a simple tunnel, but rather a multi-dimensional hub that connects numerous realities simultaneously. Such a structure would allow the Mind Flayer to coordinate activities across multiple versions of Earth or entirely different planets, creating a network of controlled realities that serve its cosmic agenda. Holly Wheeler's potential development of cleric abilities, particularly the power to create dimension doors that allow teleportation to visualize locations, may provide the key to bypassing the wall's defenses and accessing the construction site directly. Her innocent nature and lack of previous supernatural exposure might make her invisible to detection systems designed to identify and neutralize experienced psychic operators. The wall's existence as a temporary structure, protecting construction that will eventually eliminate the need for such barriers, implies that its destruction might serve Vecna's purposes rather than hindering them. Once the permanent wormhole network is complete, the wall could be dissolved or absorbed into other projects, leaving behind an open highway between dimensions that would make human resistance infinitely more difficult. The countdown implied by the wall's protective function suggests that time is running out for any human intervention to prevent the completion of this interdimensional infrastructure project. Once the tunnel network becomes operational, the balance of power between dimensions will shift permanently in favor of the Mind Flayer and its various agents, making Earth just another colony in a vast empire of controlled realities. The scientific principles underlying the wall's construction combine theoretical physics with practical engineering in ways that demonstrate the Mind Flayer's mastery of both natural laws and their supernatural extensions. The entity's ability to manipulate matter and energy across dimensional boundaries represents technological capabilities that human civilization could not hope to match, even with centuries of focused development. Understanding the wall's true purpose and the timeline for its removal becomes crucial for anyone hoping to prevent the permanent subjugation of Earth to alien control. The flesh barrier represents not just an obstacle to be overcome, but a countdown clock, measuring the time remaining before the window for human resistance closes forever. The military installation that Hopper and Eleven discover hidden within the Upside Down represents the culmination of decades of government experimentation with supernatural phenomena, a secret facility that makes Hawkins National Laboratory seem like a modest research station by comparison. The base operates with the clinical efficiency of a medical facility combined with the security protocols of a maximum security prison, its sterile corridors humming with equipment that serves purposes too classified for official documentation. Dr. K oversees this underground empire with the focused intensity of someone who believes that moral considerations are luxuries that humanity can no longer afford. Her experiments push the boundaries of ethical science into territories that previous generations of researchers would have considered unconscionable, but she justifies every violation with the argument that extraordinary circumstances require extraordinary measures. The creatures and abilities she studies represent existential threats to human civilization, and in her mind, any method that might provide defensive capabilities becomes not just acceptable, but morally imperative. The revelation that Kaylee remains alive and imprisoned within this facility recontextualizes every aspect of the military's operations in Hawkins. Her capture represents not just the seizure of a powerful psychic individual, but the acquisition of capabilities that could fundamentally alter the balance of power in the supernatural conflict. Kaylee's abilities to create convincing illusions that can fool even other psychic individuals make her perhaps the most strategically valuable asset in the entire conflict, someone whose cooperation could determine the outcome of humanity's struggle against interdimensional invasion. The apparatus that holds Kali suspended in a web of cables and monitoring equipment resembles a high-tech version of medieval torture devices, designed to extract maximum utility from her abilities while ensuring her complete inability to resist or escape. The machine appears to tap directly into her nervous system, harvesting her psychic energy while simultaneously suppressing her conscious will through a combination of pharmaceutical intervention and technological manipulation. The sight of her trapped and helpless creates a disturbing parallel to the experimental chambers where Eleven and her fellow test subjects endured years of abuse disguised as scientific research. Dr. K's description of Kali as Eleven's kryptonite suggests a strategic understanding of psychic abilities that goes far beyond simple power measurement. Where Superman's weakness was exposure to fragments of his destroyed homeworld, Eleven's vulnerability lies in confronting someone whose abilities operate in direct opposition to her own. Kali's illusions can create false realities, so convincing that even Eleven's enhanced perception cannot distinguish them from genuine experiences, making her potentially helpless against an opponent who controls the very nature of reality itself. The machine's apparent ability to amplify and direct Kali's natural abilities transforms her from a dangerous individual into a weapon of mass deception. Under Dr. K's control, Kaylee's illusions could be projected across vast distances and maintained for extended periods, creating false realities that could confuse entire populations or hide military operations from supernatural surveillance. The implications of this technology extend far beyond the immediate conflict with Vecna, suggesting applications in conventional warfare that would revolutionize the nature of international conflict. The flesh wall that surrounds Hawkins may itself be one of Kali's illusions, a massive deception designed to create the appearance of supernatural construction while hiding the military's true activities within the protected zone. If this theory proves correct, then Hopper and Eleven's entire journey through the Upside Down has been carefully orchestrated theater, their movements guided by illusory obstacles and false discoveries toward the ultimate goal of delivering Eleven directly into Dr. K's hands. The soldier's casual urination against the wall takes on sinister significance under this interpretation, representing not ignorance or indifference, but insider knowledge about the illusion's harmless nature. His behavior serves as a signal to those who understand the wall's artificial origins, while maintaining the deception for those who believe they are encountering genuine supernatural phenomena. The sizzling sound that may accompany his action could be either genuine chemical reaction or auditory illusion designed to reinforce the wall's apparent biological nature. The military's ability to operate within the Upside Down without suffering constant Demogorgon attacks suggests either advanced defensive technologies or some form of negotiated arrangement with the creatures that control the alternate dimension. If Kali's illusions are being used to make military personnel invisible to supernatural predators, this would explain their apparent immunity to attacks that devastate civilian populations. The technology that enables such protection represents a strategic advantage that could shift the entire balance of power in the interdimensional conflict. Hopper's decision to wear explosives during his infiltration of the military facility demonstrates both his understanding of the stakes involved and his willingness to make the ultimate sacrifice to prevent Eleven from falling into enemy hands. The failsafe device represents his commitment to ensuring that neither he nor Eleven can be used as weapons against the people they have sworn to protect, even if this means destroying themselves and everyone around them in a final act of defiance. The explosive vest also serves as insurance against the possibility that he has already been compromised by supernatural influence or technological manipulation without his knowledge. In a conflict where reality itself can be altered by various forms of psychic interference, the only certainty lies in actions that cannot be undone or redirected by enemy intervention. The failsafe represents Hopper's ultimate expression of free will in a situation where his thoughts and perceptions may no longer be entirely his own. Dr. K's belief that she is saving innocent lives by capturing and experimenting on psychic children reveals the dangerous logic that emerges when existential threats justify previously unthinkable actions. Her view of Eleven as a homicidal maniac responsible for the deaths of military personnel reflects a perspective that judges individuals based solely on their capacity for destruction rather than their intentions or moral choices. This utilitarian calculus reduces complex human beings to assets and threats, eliminating ethical considerations that might interfere with strategic objectives. The doctor's frustration with hitting walls in her research suggests that her experiments have reached the limits of what conventional scientific methods can accomplish when applied to supernatural phenomena. Kali's capture represents an attempt to break through these limitations by acquiring capabilities that operate according to different rules than those governing normal reality. The combination of technological amplification with psychic abilities that transcend physical laws offers the possibility of breakthroughs that pure science could never achieve. The three-way alliance between Eleven, Kali, and Will that begins to emerge represents the convergence of complementary abilities that together might possess the power to challenge cosmic-level threats. Eleven's telekinetic abilities provide raw power that can alter physical reality through force of will. Kali's illusion-generating capabilities offer the means to deceive and misdirect enemies whose perceptions can be manipulated. Will's connection to the hive mind provides intelligence and crowd control capabilities that could neutralize the numerical advantages that supernatural enemies typically enjoy. The mathematical symbolism of rolling a 20 in Dungeons & Dragons takes on literal significance when applied to this psychic trinity. 11 plus 8 plus 1 equals 20, the number required to defeat Vecna according to the rules of the game that has served as metaphor for their entire struggle. This numerical coincidence suggests either remarkable luck or the operation of deeper patterns that govern both fictional narratives and supernatural realities. The cooperation required to achieve this mathematical victory presents significant challenges given the personalities and experiences of the three psychic individuals involved. Eleven's history with Kali includes philosophical disagreements about the proper use of supernatural abilities, conflicts that resulted in their separation during Season 2. Will's connection to Vecna creates the possibility that his participation in the Alliance could serve enemy interests rather than human survival, making trust a luxury that the group may not be able to afford. The amplification technologies that Dr. K has developed for use with Kali's abilities could potentially be adapted to enhance the capabilities of other psychic individuals, creating the possibility of temporary power boosts that might make the difference between victory and defeat in crucial confrontations. However, such enhancements would likely come with significant risks, including the possibility of permanent damage to the enhanced individuals or loss of conscious control over artificially boosted abilities. The military's perspective on the psychic children reflects broader governmental attitudes toward individuals whose capabilities transcend normal human limitations. Rather than recognizing them as people deserving protection and support, official policy treats them as weapons to be controlled or threats to be neutralized. This dehumanization makes possible the kinds of experimental programs that would be unthinkable if applied to individuals considered fully human. Kali's imprisonment serves multiple purposes beyond simply preventing her from using her abilities against government interests. Her captivity provides researchers with a living laboratory for studying the mechanisms underlying psychic phenomena, potentially leading to technological applications that could grant similar capabilities to non-psychic individuals. The knowledge gained from such research could revolutionize everything from military operations to entertainment industries, making Kali's cooperation valuable far beyond her immediate tactical applications. The ethics of using Kali's abilities against Vecna become complicated by questions about consent and coercion. If she is forced to participate in operations against her will, her illusions might serve human strategic interests while perpetrating continued violation of her personal autonomy. The moral cost of such actions could ultimately prove greater than any tactical advantages gained, particularly if the methods used to secure cooperation set precedents for future treatment of psychic individuals. The possibility that Vecna himself might be using Kali's abilities raises disturbing questions about the reliability of any information or experiences that the protagonists have encountered during their journey through the Upside Down. If the entity has gained access to illusion-generating capabilities through some form of psychic infiltration or technological interface, then the entire reality of the military installation could be a deception designed to manipulate human responses in ways that serve interdimensional rather than terrestrial interests. The timing of Eleven and Hopper's arrival at the military facility coincides suspiciously with the escalation of supernatural activities in Hawkins, suggesting either remarkable coincidence or careful orchestration by forces that understand the psychological and strategic factors governing human decision-making. Their capture could represent the culmination of a long-term plan to acquire Eleven's abilities, rather than the unfortunate result of miscalculation or bad luck. The revelation of Kali's imprisonment transforms the rescue mission from a simple infiltration into a complex extraction that must account for her physical condition, psychological state, and potential technological dependencies that might make her removal from the facility dangerous or impossible. Years of captivity and experimentation could have created medical complications that require specialized treatment, while psychological conditioning might make her distrustful of rescue attempts or genuinely loyal to her captors. The strategic implications of freeing Kali extend beyond the immediate tactical advantages her abilities might provide in the fight against Vecna. Her liberation could serve as proof that human resistance remains capable of achieving victories against seemingly impossible odds, providing psychological encouragement for other resistance efforts, while demonstrating that no prison can permanently contain the human spirit when supported by determined allies willing to risk everything for freedom. The final confrontation brewing between the military forces and the psychic children represents more than just a battle between opposing factions. It embodies the fundamental conflict between institutional power and individual autonomy that has driven human history since the first governments claimed authority over their citizens. The outcome of this struggle will determine not just who wins the supernatural war, but what kind of world will exist for any survivors to inherit. The profound connection between Madeleine L'Englè's masterwork A Wrinkle in Time and the unfolding supernatural crisis in Hawkins reveals itself through layers of literary parallel that suggest the Duffer Brothers have been drawing from this classic science fiction novel since the series' inception. Holly Wheeler's reference to the story during her imprisonment in Vecna's memory palace is not casual literary citation, but recognition of a blueprint for victory that has been hiding in plain sight throughout the entire Stranger Things narrative. The planet Camazotz that L'Engle created as the setting for her cosmic battle between good and evil bears striking similarities to the Upside Down and its relationship to our reality. On Camazotz, A disembodied brain called IT maintains absolute control over the population through psychic manipulation, reducing individual consciousness to mere extensions of its own will. The residents of this world move in perfect synchronization, their thoughts and actions controlled by an intelligence that views diversity and free will as diseases, to be eliminated through totalitarian harmony. Vecna's vision for humanity mirrors IT's achievement on Camazotz with disturbing precision. The hive mind that he seeks to establish would reduce human consciousness to a collective state where individual thoughts and desires become impossible, where every mind serves the greater purpose defined by the controlling entity. The children he captures serve as test subjects for this transformation, their young minds more malleable than adult consciousness and therefore more suitable for the kind of fundamental restructuring that his plan requires. Holly's identification with Meg Murray, the protagonist of Langlois' novel, reflects her unconscious understanding of the role she must play in the coming battle. Meg's journey to rescue her father from IT's control required her to venture into hostile territory, armed only with love and determination, facing an enemy whose power seemed absolute and whose victory appeared inevitable. The parallel between Mr. Murray's imprisonment on Camazotz and the current situation of the captured children provides a roadmap for liberation that transcends the specific details of either fictional scenario. The glasses that Meg used to free her father from IT's control represent the kind of simple but profound tool that love provides in battles against cosmic evil. The item itself matters less than the intention behind its use and the emotional connection it represents between the rescuer and the rescued. Max's discovery that music bridges the gap between Vecna's memory world and reality demonstrates the same principle. Ordinary objects become extraordinary when charged with the power of authentic human emotion. Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill serves as Max's equivalent to Meg's glasses, a focal point for memories and emotions that prove stronger than supernatural manipulation. The song's lyrics about making a deal with God to swap places with someone else resonate with Max's willingness to sacrifice herself for others, creating a resonance between art and experience that transcends dimensional boundaries. The cassette tape that nearly jams during her escape attempt represents the fragility of these emotional anchors and the constant threat that technology might fail when supernatural intervention is most desperately needed. The mechanism by which music creates bridges between dimensions operates on principles that combine psychology with physics in ways that conventional science is only beginning to understand. Sound waves carry information that extends beyond simple auditory data, encoding emotional and memory content that can activate neural pathways across dimensional barriers. When someone hears a beloved song, their consciousness follows familiar patterns that exist independently of their current physical location, creating pathways that supernatural entities cannot fully control or predict. The specific frequency patterns in certain musical compositions may resonate with the fundamental vibrations that maintain dimensional boundaries, creating interference patterns that weaken supernatural control mechanisms. This would explain why Vecna's influence becomes less effective when his victims focus on music that carries strong emotional associations. The competing frequencies disrupt his ability to maintain the psychic connections that enable his manipulation of human consciousness. Tiffany's music in Holly's case represents more than simple nostalgic preference. It embodies the innocence and optimism of childhood in an era when the future seemed bright and possibilities unlimited. The synthetic pop perfection of 1980s music creates sonic landscapes that exist in direct opposition to the organic horror of the Upside Down, offering refuge in artificial beauty that serves as sanctuary from natural ugliness. The power of love that ultimately defeats it in Langlois' novel operates according to principles that transcend romantic attachment to encompass all forms of genuine human connection: the love between parent and child, the loyalty between friends, the compassion for strangers, the appreciation of beauty, the commitment to justice. All of these emotional states create frequencies that cosmic evil cannot replicate or understand, making them weapons that no amount of power or intelligence can neutralize. Max's snowball kiss memory represents the crystallization of pure happiness into a form that can be accessed and experienced regardless of current circumstances. The image serves as more than simple nostalgia. It becomes a portal through which her consciousness can travel back to a time and place where love was uncomplicated and joy was possible. This temporal displacement through emotional connection demonstrates love's ability to transcend not just space but time itself, offering refuge in moments that external forces cannot touch or corrupt. The collective love that binds the Hawkins group together creates a network of emotional connections that proves more resilient than any individual relationship could be on its own. When Mike speaks of traveling to a faraway, peaceful land together, he articulates the dream that has sustained them through years of supernatural crisis, the vision of a future where their bonds remain intact, despite the changes that growth and experience inevitably bring. This communal aspect of love explains why the Demogorgon fighting has always required group effort rather than individual heroism. No single person possesses sufficient emotional resources to withstand cosmic-level threats, but communities bound by genuine affection can create collective strength that exceeds the sum of their individual capabilities. The party's success against supernatural enemies has always depended on their willingness to support each other rather than attempting to face dangers alone. Jonathan and Nancy's relationship represents love's ability to survive and flourish despite external pressures that might destroy weaker connections. The engagement ring that Jonathan carries symbolizes his commitment to building a future with Nancy, regardless of the chaos that surrounds their present circumstances. Their choice to prioritize personal happiness in the midst of cosmic crisis demonstrates love's power to assert the importance of individual human connections against forces that would reduce people to mere statistics in larger calculations. Steve's potential sacrifice for Nancy's happiness reflects the most selfless expression of romantic love, the willingness to step aside when someone else can provide what the beloved needs more effectively. His recognition that Jonathan can offer Nancy stability and understanding that he cannot provide demonstrates emotional maturity that transcends simple possessiveness to embrace genuine care for another person's welfare above his own désir. Robin's guidance to Will about the liberating power of self-acceptance represents love turned inward, the recognition that authentic self-knowledge provides the foundation for all other forms of emotional connection. Her personal experience of the weight lifting from her shoulders after she stopped being afraid of her true identity offers Will a model for how self-love can become the source of strength rather than vulnerability. The distinction between love and possession becomes crucial in understanding why genuine affection proves effective against supernatural manipulation, while obsessive attachment only creates additional vulnerabilities. Vecna's control mechanisms exploit the kinds of emotional dependencies that masquerade as love but actually represent forms of psychological parasitism. True love enhances the beloved's freedom and autonomy rather than restricting them, making it inherently resistant to the totalitarian impulses that drive cosmic evil. The Upside Down's frozen state on November 6, 1983, may result from Will's unconscious use of love as a preservative force, his deep attachment to home and family creating a temporal bubble that maintains familiar surroundings even in an alien dimension. His memories of building Castle Byers with Jonathan provided the emotional blueprint for shaping hostile territory into something recognizable and comforting. demonstrating love's power to impose order on chaos through the simple act of caring deeply about particular people and places. Castle Byers itself stands as a monument to the love between brothers, a physical manifestation of the creative joy that emerges when people work together towards shared goals. The fort's preservation in the Upside Down suggests that structures built from love possess a permanence that transcends normal physical laws, becoming landmarks that can be rediscovered and inhabited even when their original context has been destroyed or abandoned. The potential for Castle Byers to serve as sanctuary or staging ground for the final battle reflects love's practical applications in supernatural warfare. Spaces that have been sanctified by genuine affection become difficult for evil forces to corrupt or control, offering refuge where strategies can be planned and strength can be gathered for confrontations with entities that exist primarily to destroy human connection and community. Will's romantic feelings for Mike, despite their one-sided nature, demonstrate love's power to inspire sacrifice and heroism even when reciprocation remains impossible. His willingness to risk everything to protect someone who cannot return his feelings reflects the purest form of selfless affection, love that expects nothing in return but offers everything nonetheless. This emotional authenticity creates strength that supernatural entities cannot comprehend or counter effectively. The mathematical precision of the love-based solution to the Vecna problem, 11 plus 8 plus 1 equals 20, suggests that the universe itself operates according to principles that favor emotional connection over mechanicalness, individual power. The numerical coincidence implies deeper patterns that govern both human relationships and cosmic conflicts, indicating that love is not merely a psychological phenomenon, but a fundamental force that shapes reality at the most basic levels. Mike's vision of their group traveling together to peaceful lands after their adventures conclude represents love's ultimate promise, the possibility of happiness that survives and transcends the struggles that initially brought people together. This dream of collective retirement to a place where their bonds can flourish without external threats provides motivation that sustains them through trials that would break individuals who lacked such connections. The power that music and memory provide to break supernatural control mechanisms demonstrates love's ability to create reality anchors that exist independently of current circumstances. When Max runs toward her happy memory, or when Will shapes the Upside Down, according to his recollections of home, they exercise love's capacity to assert alternative versions of reality that compete with and ultimately overcome the false realities that evil entities attempt to impose. Love's victory over cosmic horror in the Stranger Things universe will likely require not just individual acts of affection but collective demonstrations of humanity's capacity for connection across differences of age, background, and experience. The diverse group that has assembled to fight the supernatural threat represents love's inclusive nature, its ability to bind together people who might never have found common ground under normal circumstances. The final battle against Vecna and the Mind Flayer will test whether love's power to create meaning and connection can withstand the nihilistic forces that seek to reduce human existence to mere biological processes serving alien agendas. The outcome will determine not just the survival of particular individuals, but the preservation of love itself as a force that makes consciousness worthwhile and existence meaningful rather than simply endurable. In the quiet moments between crises, when the characters gather around kitchen tables or sit together in cars driving through the night, love reveals its most profound victory, the transformation of ordinary time into sacred time, of routine interactions into celebrations of connection that justify all the sacrifices required to preserve them. These small demonstrations of affection may prove more powerful than any dramatic gesture in the final accounting of what makes human life worth defending against cosmic indifference. The revelation that the Mind Flayer represents the true puppet master behind the supernatural crisis plaguing Hawkins fundamentally recontextualizes every event that has unfolded since Eleven first made contact with the Demogorgon in the sensory deprivation tank at Hawkins National Laboratory. What appeared to be a straightforward narrative of human corruption and interdimensional invasion reveals itself as something far more complex and terrifying: the patient manipulation of reality by an ancient intelligence whose understanding of time and causality operates on scales that dwarf human comprehension. The Mind Flayer's existence predates not just human civilization, but possibly the formation of Earth itself, representing a form of consciousness that evolved in the spaces between dimensions where normal physical laws hold no dominion. This entity embodies the concept of cosmic horror that H.P. Lovecraft explored in his writings. The idea that the universe contains intelligences so vast and alien that human minds cannot process their true nature without descending into madness. The shadow that spreads across dimensions like ink through water represents not mere darkness, but the physical manifestation of thoughts that exist beyond the boundaries of individual identity. Henry Creel's transformation into Vecna, viewed through this lens, becomes a tragedy of cosmic proportions rather than a simple tale of human evil, choosing to embrace darkness. The boy who wandered into those Nevada caves in 1947 was not seeking power or revenge, but following the innocent curiosity that drives all children to explore the unknown. His encounter with the remnants of the Philadelphia experiment opened a doorway that should never have been breached, connecting his developing consciousness to an intelligence that had been waiting since before the birth of stars for exactly such an opportunity. The 12 hours that Henry spent in Dimension X parallel Will Byers' experience in the Upside Down with chilling precision, suggesting that the Mind Flayer has been refining its infection techniques across decades of experimentation with human subjects. Where Will's exposure was brief enough and his rescue swift enough to leave him partially free, Henry's longer immersion in the alien environment allowed the entity to establish control mechanisms that would take years to fully manifest but would ultimately prove absolute in their domination of his consciousness. The change in Henry's blood type following his return from Dimension X represents more than simple biological alteration. It indicates fundamental restructuring of his cellular composition to accommodate the Mind Flayer's presence within his physical form. The entity's particles became integrated into his bloodstream, creating a permanent connection between his consciousness and the cosmic intelligence that had claimed him. This biological integration explains why Henry's powers grew stronger over time rather than fading, as the Mind Flayer's influence spread through his developing nervous system like a benign tumor that gradually replaced healthy tissue with something alien and hostile. Dr. Martin Brenner's interest in Henry Creel was not the curiosity of a scientist studying an unusual specimen, but the recognition of someone who understood that he had discovered the key to weaponizing forces beyond human understanding. The experiments conducted at Hawkins Laboratory were not attempts to replicate Henry's natural abilities, but efforts to artificially induce the kind of dimensional infection that had transformed an ordinary child into a vessel for cosmic horror. The blood transfusions given to the mothers of Eleven and Carly were not random medical procedures, but carefully calculated attempts to create new hosts for the Mind Flayer's expanding influence. The failure of these artificial infection attempts to produce subjects as powerful as Henry reveals the importance of timing and circumstance in the Mind Flayer's propagation methods. The children created through laboratory intervention possessed fragments of the entity's power, but lacked the deep integration that could only result from direct exposure to Dimension X during the critical developmental period when consciousness itself was still forming. Their abilities remained limited and controllable because their infection was incomplete, making them useful tools but not true extensions of the Mind Flayer's will. The theatrical production of Dark of the Moon that Henry participated in during his final year of apparent normalcy serves as unwitting prophecy of his ultimate fate. The story of a witch boy who falls in love with a human girl, reflecting the last gasps of his humanity as the Mind Flayer's control mechanisms activated within his maturing brain. His performance in the role was convincing not because of acting talent, but because he was actually living the transformation from human to monster that the script described in metaphorical terms. The Mind Flayer's patient approach to conquering reality reflects an intelligence that measures success in geological rather than human timescales, viewing individual lives and civilizations as temporary phenomena that can be manipulated and discarded in service of larger objectives. The entity's willingness to spend decades cultivating a single host like Henry Creel demonstrates strategic thinking that operates beyond the immediate gratification that drives most forms of consciousness, suggesting a level of cosmic patience that makes it nearly impossible to predict or counter using conventional military or political strategies. The stage plays Stranger Things. The first shadow reveals crucial details about the Mind Flayer's influence over Henry's early development that explain how the entity was able to maintain control while avoiding detection by those who knew him before his transformation. The boy's artistic talents and sensitive nature made him an ideal candidate for subtle manipulation, as creative individuals are naturally attuned to influences that exist beyond ordinary perception. The Mind Flayer could guide his thoughts and actions through inspiration and intuition rather than obvious compulsion, making its control appear to be natural personal growth rather than external manipulation. The entity's understanding of human psychology allows it to exploit the emotional vulnerabilities that make people susceptible to influence, using loneliness, fear, and desire for acceptance as entry points for deeper psychological manipulation. Henry's isolation as an unusual child in a conventional small-town environment provided perfect conditions for the Mind Flayer to position itself as the understanding presence that appreciated his unique qualities while gradually reshaping those qualities to serve alien purposes. The cosmic horror elements that permeate the Mind Flayer's methodology reflect its origins in dimensions where the concepts of individual identity and personal autonomy have no meaning. The entity exists as pure consciousness, distributed across vast networks of interconnected awareness, making the human concept of selfhood as foreign to it as its hive mind nature is terrifying to individual human consciousness. This fundamental incompatibility between human and Mind Flayer psychology explains why peaceful coexistence between the species is impossible. Their basic concepts of existence are mutually exclusive. The particle physics that underlies the Mind Flayer's ability to spread its influence across dimensions operates according to principles that Earth scientists are only beginning to glimpse through quantum mechanics and theoretical physics. The particles that carry the entity's consciousness behave like quantum information that can exist in multiple states simultaneously, allowing them to maintain coherent patterns across dimensional boundaries while adapting to local physical conditions. This quantum nature explains why the Mind Flayer's influence can spread through blood, air, and even psychic contact without requiring continuous physical connection to maintain control. Ram's theory about Will serving as an antenna for Mind Flayer transmissions reveals the sophisticated communication networks that the entity has established throughout its various areas of influence. Will's brain has been restructured to receive and process signals that exist in frequency ranges beyond normal human perception, making him a living receiver for information that spans multiple dimensions and timelines. This biological modification explains his ability to sense supernatural threats and predict Vecna's actions, but it also makes him a potential security risk if the Mind Flayer chooses to use these communication channels for more aggressive forms of influence. The true scope of the Mind Flayer's plan extends far beyond the conquest of Earth or even the merger of dimensions that Vecna appears to be orchestrating. The entity's ultimate goal involves the transformation of reality itself into a state where individual consciousness becomes impossible, where all awareness serves the collective intelligence that has been expanding its influence across countless worlds and dimensions since before the formation of galaxies. Earth represents not a prize to be won, but a single neuron in a vast brain that the Mind Flayer is constructing across the entire cosmos. The biological horror of the Mind Flayer's reproduction methods involves not just the infection of individual hosts, but the gradual replacement of entire ecosystems with versions that serve its collective consciousness. The creatures of the Upside Down are not separate species, but specialized organs in a vast organism that spans dimensions, each fulfilling specific functions in the entity's cosmic metabolism. Demogorgons serve as antibodies that eliminate threats to the system, while Demodogs function as construction workers that reshape environments to better accommodate the Mind Flayer's needs. The temporal aspects of the Mind Flayer's influence explain why the Upside Down remains frozen on November 6, 1983. The entity has the ability to manipulate time within its controlled territories, creating temporal bubbles where specific moments can be preserved indefinitely for study or strategic purposes. This time manipulation capability makes conventional military planning nearly impossible, as the enemy can potentially undo unfavorable outcomes by resetting local timeline conditions to earlier states. The revelation that Henry Creel was a victim rather than a willing collaborator in the Mind Flayer's schemes opens possibilities for redemption that complicate the moral landscape of the final confrontation. If some fragment of his original personality survives within the cosmic horror that Vecna has become, then destroying the entity might constitute murder of an innocent person rather than the elimination of a willing agent of evil. This ethical complexity adds layers of difficulty to any plan that involves killing Vecna, as the heroes must grapple with the possibility that their enemy is himself a prisoner of forces beyond his control. The Mind Flayer's vulnerability, if it possesses one, likely lies in its inability to truly understand the human concepts of love and individual sacrifice that have repeatedly disrupted its carefully laid plans. The entity's collective consciousness makes it incapable of comprehending why individuals would choose to act against their apparent self-interest for the benefit of others, creating blind spots in its strategic calculations that determined humans can exploit. The power of genuine human connection represents a form of chaos that the Mind Flayer's ordered intelligence cannot predict or replicate, making authentic relationships the most effective weapons against cosmic horror. The network of controlled realities that the Mind Flayer has been constructing across multiple dimensions suggests that Earth's supernatural crisis is not unique, but part of a pattern that has been repeated countless times on worlds. Throughout the universe, the entity's invasion methods have been refined through eons of practice against civilizations that lacked the knowledge or preparation necessary to mount effective resistance. Humanity's awareness of the threat and its understanding of the enemy's nature may provide advantages that previous victims never possessed, but these advantages must be leveraged quickly before the Mind Flayer adapts its strategies to account for informed opposition. The final revelation that awaits in the series' conclusion may be the discovery that the Mind Flayer itself is merely a component in an even larger system of cosmic intelligence, a middle management entity in a hierarchy of consciousness that extends beyond the boundaries of observable reality. This possibility suggests that victory against the immediate threat may only delay rather than prevent humanity's eventual absorption into systems of control that operate on scales too vast for human minds to fully comprehend. The true horror may not be the enemy they can see, but the enemies that remain hidden beyond the edges of human perception, waiting their turn to reshape reality according to agendas that transcend the survival of any individual species or civilization. The radio tower that looms above Hawkins like a steel sentinel against the darkening sky has become the focal point of theories surrounding Steve Harrington's potential sacrifice. Its metallic framework, serving as both literal infrastructure and symbolic gallows for a character whose journey from privileged antagonist to beloved protector may be approaching its tragic conclusion. The extensive focus that the narrative has placed on the tower's climbing sequences suggests that this vertical challenge represents more than simple physical obstacle. It embodies the final test of character that will determine whether Steve's transformation from selfish teenager to selfless hero finds its ultimate expression in an act of supreme sacrifice. The foreshadowing embedded in Jonathan's t-shirt, emblazoned with the word "The Fall," operates with the kind of literary precision that transforms casual wardrobe choices into prophetic statements about the fate awaiting those brave enough to climb towards salvation. This sartorial prophecy suggests that someone's descent from great heights will play a crucial role in the series' resolution, with Steve's established connection to the radio tower making him the most likely candidate for such a dramatically vertical demise. The strategic importance of the radio tower in combating Vecna's influence stems from music's proven ability to disrupt the entity's psychic control mechanisms, making the broadcast capabilities of a functioning radio station potentially decisive in any large-scale confrontation with supernatural forces. The tower's capacity to transmit protective frequencies across vast distances could theoretically create a sonic shield that prevents Vecna from establishing the kind of widespread mental control that his invasion plans require, transforming entertainment infrastructure into military defense systems. Steve's willingness to undertake the dangerous climb necessary to restore or maintain the tower's functionality reflects his evolution from someone who sought glory and recognition to someone who accepts that true heroism often occurs without witnesses or acclaim. His journey up the tower's treacherous framework, buffeted by winds and supernatural interference, would represent a physical manifestation of his internal journey toward genuine courage and self-sacrifice. Each rung climbed, marking another step away from his original selfish nature. The power overload that threatens to disable the tower's broadcasting capabilities creates the kind of technical crisis that requires someone to manually reset systems while remaining exposed to both electrical hazards and supernatural attack. Steve's decision to undertake this mission despite the obvious dangers would demonstrate his complete transformation from someone who avoided risk to someone who seeks out opportunities to protect others, regardless of the personal cost involved. The romantic motivation that drives Steve's sacrifice adds layers of complexity to his final act, as his willingness to die for Nancy's safety, while simultaneously acknowledging that Jonathan can provide her with happiness that he cannot represents the most mature expression of love possible. This emotional sophistication transcends simple romantic rivalry to embrace a form of selfless affection that prioritizes the beloved's welfare above the lover's desires, creating a template for heroic behavior that extends far beyond romantic contexts. The blessing that Steve's sacrifice would represent for Jonathan and Nancy's relationship transforms his death from tragic loss into generous gift, his final act serving to remove the obstacle that his continued presence might create for their future happiness. This conscious choice to step aside through ultimate sacrifice demonstrates emotional growth that few fictional characters achieve, transforming potential antagonist into facilitator of others' joy through the most profound act of renunciation possible. Hopper's parallel journey toward potential sacrifice carries different emotional weight due to his history of loss and his role as surrogate father to children who have already experienced too much abandonment and trauma. His previous experience of losing his daughter Sarah to cancer created psychological wounds that have never fully healed, making his current relationship with Eleven both precious and terrifying as he faces the possibility of experiencing such devastating loss again. The protective instincts that drive Hopper towards self-sacrifice reflect not just personal attachment to Eleven, but recognition that she represents hope for humanity's future in ways that transcend individual relationships. His willingness to die to protect her serves multiple purposes simultaneously, preserving someone he loves, while ensuring that her unique abilities remain available for humanity's defense against supernatural threats that conventional military forces cannot hope to counter effectively. Dr. K's role as antagonist in Hopper's potential sacrifice scenario creates a personal dimension to the conflict that extends beyond simple tactical considerations. The Doctor's willingness to exploit and potentially harm children in service of her research agenda represents everything that Hopper's protective nature rebels against, making their confrontation a battle between competing philosophies of how society should treat its most vulnerable members. The explosive vest that Hopper wears during his infiltration of the military facility represents his ultimate commitment to preventing Eleven from falling into enemy hands, even if such prevention requires destroying himself along with everyone in the immediate vicinity. This failsafe mechanism demonstrates his understanding that some fates are worse than death, particularly for children whose unique abilities make them targets for exploitation by those who view human beings as resources rather than individuals deserving protection. Eddie Munson's potential return from apparent death through transformation into a vampiric entity draws from Dungeons & Dragons lore that transforms the tragedy of his sacrifice into the possibility of supernatural resurrection. The Kaz the Bloody-Handed mythology provides a template for how someone killed by Vecna's forces might return as an undead ally, their previous loyalty to friends transcending death to create new opportunities for heroic action in altered form. The Demobat attacks that killed Eddie in the Upside Down created the specific conditions necessary for vampiric transformation, according to fantasy gaming traditions, with the creature's supernatural nature potentially transmitting otherworldly diseases that reanimate the dead rather than simply causing mortality. This resurrection mechanism would allow Eddie's return while acknowledging the reality of his sacrifice, creating a character who embodies both death and rebirth in service of continuing heroism. Joyce Byers' potential recognition of Vecna as Henry Creel from their shared high school experience adds personal history to what might otherwise be purely supernatural confrontation, transforming cosmic horror into human tragedy, as she realizes that the monster threatening her family was once a boy she knew during their youth. This recognition could provide crucial intelligence about Henry's original personality and potential weaknesses that purely tactical analysis might miss. The emotional impact of Joyce confronting her former classmate turned cosmic horror would test her ability to separate the innocent child she once knew from the entity that child became through circumstances beyond his control. Her struggle to reconcile these contradictory identities, Henry the drama student and Vecna the destroyer, might parallel the larger challenge facing all the heroes as they attempt to save what can be saved, while destroying what cannot be redeemed. Lucas Sinclair's vigil at Max's hospital bedside represents the kind of faithful devotion that transcends romantic attachment to become spiritual commitment, his presence serving as anchor point that might enable her consciousness to find its way back from Vecna's memory palace to the world of the living. His protection of her vulnerable physical form during Demogorgon attacks demonstrates love's practical applications in supernatural warfare, showing how emotional bonds translate into tactical advantages. The hospital setting that Lucas must defend creates unique challenges as medical equipment and confined spaces limit mobility while increasing vulnerability to attack. His need to balance Max's medical needs with security requirements forces him to become both caregiver and warrior simultaneously, roles that demand different skills, but united by the same underlying commitment to protecting someone he loves, regardless of whether that love can ever be reciprocated. Dustin Henderson's mathematical contributions to the group's strategic planning reflect his evolution from comic relief character to vital intelligence analyst, whose understanding of physics and geometry provides crucial insights into the supernatural threats they face. His calculation of the flesh wall's circular dimensions and the laboratory's central position within that circle demonstrates how academic knowledge can be weaponized against cosmic threats when applied by someone who understands both theoretical principles and practical applications. The intersection between Dustin's scientific training and the group's supernatural challenges creates opportunities for solutions that neither pure magic nor pure science could achieve alone. His ability to translate complex physics concepts into terms that his less academically inclined friends can understand makes him an essential bridge between the theoretical knowledge necessary for victory and the practical heroism required to implement that knowledge under combat conditions. Robin Buckley's role as wisdom counselor for Will and other struggling characters reflects her transformation from supporting player to emotional anchor for the entire group. Her personal experience with identity acceptance, providing guidance that helps others navigate their own journeys towards self-understanding. Her conversations with Will about embracing authentic identity rather than seeking external validation offer psychological tools that prove as important as any supernatural ability in the fight against forces that seek to eliminate individual consciousness. The guidance that Robin provides operates on multiple levels simultaneously, addressing both immediate tactical concerns and long-term psychological health in ways that demonstrate her intuitive understanding of how personal growth and heroic action reinforce each other. Her ability to help others find strength in authenticity rather than conformity creates multiplier effects that enhance the entire group's effectiveness while building resilience that can withstand supernatural attack, manipulation. The Wheeler family dynamics that emerge through Holly's supernatural experiences test the relationships between parents and children in ways that reveal both strengths and vulnerabilities within their domestic structure. Mike's protective instincts toward his little sister parallel his leadership role within the larger group, while Nancy's investigative determination to uncover the truth about Holly's situation demonstrates how family loyalty can motivate behavior that transcends normal risk assessment calculations. Holly's own development from innocent child to active participant in supernatural conflict reflects the series' ongoing theme about how extraordinary circumstances force ordinary people to discover capabilities they never knew they possessed. Her potential emergence as a hero in her own right, rather than simply a victim requiring rescue, would complete the Wheeler family's evolution from normal suburban household to supernatural warrior clan bound together by love, commitment to protecting each other. The sacrifices that await these characters in the series' final episodes will test not just their individual courage, but their collective ability to support each other through losses that would be devastating if experienced in isolation. The network of relationships they have built over years of shared trials provides the emotional infrastructure necessary to survive the kind of casualties that cosmic-level conflicts inevitably demand, but it also creates additional vulnerabilities as each person's welfare becomes intertwined with the psychological health of their companions. The mathematical precision with which these character arcs intersect and reinforce each other suggests that the final confrontation will require not just individual acts of heroism, but coordinated sacrifice that demonstrates humanity's capacity for cooperation in the face of forces that seek to reduce consciousness to mere biological process serving alien agendas. Their willingness to die for each other represents the ultimate expression of the love that has sustained them through previous trials and may prove to be the weapon that cosmic horror cannot counter or comprehend. In the quiet moments before the final battle, these characters carry within themselves the accumulated weight of all the choices that have brought them to this point, their individual journeys toward heroism, converging into a collective readiness to pay whatever price is necessary to preserve the world they love, and the people who give that world meaning through their presence and their willingness to fight for something greater than their own survival. The circular nature of storytelling that brings heroes back to their origins represents one of literature's most enduring patterns, and the theory that Stranger Things will conclude where it began, around Mike Wheeler's basement table with dice and character sheets spread before a group of friends planning their next adventure, carries the weight of both prophecy and poetry. The Duffer Brothers stated reverence for that opening Dungeons and Dragons sequence as their favorite scene in the entire series suggests more than nostalgic attachment. It indicates recognition that this moment captured something essential about friendship and imagination that subsequent supernatural crises have tested, but never destroyed. The basement that served as sanctuary for childhood games has evolved throughout the series, from simple recreational space to command center for operations that determine the fate of reality itself. Yet its fundamental character, as a place where friends gather to face challenges together, remains unchanged. The transformation of fantasy gaming into literal battle against cosmic horror creates a thematic arc that could find its perfect resolution in a return to the table where imagination first provided these characters with the tools they would need to survive actual encounters with the monsters they once fought only in their minds. Mike's role as Dungeon Master throughout the series has prepared him for leadership responsibilities that extend far beyond organizing weekend entertainment. His understanding of narrative structure and character development proving surprisingly applicable to situations where the stakes involve actual life and death, rather than fictional victories and defeats. His ability to guide a story towards satisfying conclusions, while ensuring that each participant feels valued and heroic, suggests that he possesses the emotional intelligence necessary to help his friends transition from their current crisis toward whatever form of peace awaits them in a post-supernatural world. The dice that will roll across that familiar table in the series' final moments carry symbolic weight that transforms simple gaming accessories into instruments of destiny, their random outcomes reflecting the chaos that has characterized the group's journey, while simultaneously offering the possibility of favorable results that skill and determination can influence but never guarantee. The 20 that must be rolled to defeat Vecna in the game world parallels the combination of abilities that Eleven, Kali, and Will must achieve in reality, suggesting that fiction and truth operate according to similar principles when examined from sufficient distance. The mathematics of victory, 11 plus 8 plus 1 equals 20, reveals patterns that suggest the universe itself operates according to rules that favor cooperation over individual achievement, making the group's collective strength more significant than any single person's extraordinary abilities. This numerical coincidence implies that their friendship was not merely circumstantial but destined, their meeting and bonding serving purposes that extend beyond their personal satisfaction to encompass cosmic responsibilities that none of them chose but all of them accepted. The time travel theories that emerge from careful analysis of Vecna's obsession with clocks open possibilities for narrative resolution that could literally return the characters to their starting point, undoing the supernatural crisis that has defined their adolescence, while preserving the growth and wisdom they gained through their trials. The grandfather clock that marks Vecna's presence in Victim's final moments operates as more than simple countdown device. It represents his understanding of temporal mechanics that could theoretically be turned against him by heroes who master similar chronological manipulation technique. The reversal of events through temporal intervention would require sacrifices that go beyond simple death to encompass the erasure of experiences that have shaped the characters' identities in fundamental ways. Returning to the night of November 6th, 1983, would restore Will to safety and spare the group years of trauma, but it would also eliminate the bonds forged through shared crisis and the personal growth achieved through facing impossible challenges together. The controversial "it was all a dream" resolution that some theorists propose represents the most radical possible interpretation of the series' relationship between fantasy and reality, suggesting that the entire supernatural crisis existed only within the imagination of children, whose Dungeons and Dragons game became so immersive that they lost track of the boundary between fiction and truth. This explanation would transform years of apparent cosmic horror into elaborate shared fantasy, making the basement table not just the ending point, but the only real location in the entire narrative. The psychological implications of such a revelation would recontextualize every supernatural event as symbolic representation of real-world challenges that adolescents face during the transition from childhood to adulthood. Vecna becomes the embodiment of fears about growing up and losing innocence, while the Upside Down represents the dark version of reality that teenagers often perceive when adult responsibilities begin to overwhelm childhood securities and certainties. The emotional devastation that such a revelation would inflict on both characters and audience members who have invested years in the reality of their struggles makes this theory simultaneously compelling and problematic, offering narrative symmetry at the cost of negating the significance of everything that has apparently occurred. The dream interpretation reduces genuine heroism to childhood fantasy while potentially invalidating the very real emotional growth that characters have experienced through their trials. Mike's vision of traveling to peaceful lands together after their adventures conclude offers an alternative to both temporal reversal and dream revelation, suggesting that the group's bonds will survive the conclusion of their supernatural mission and carry them toward futures that honor both their shared experiences and their individual aspirations. This exodus from Hawkins represents not escape from reality, but graduation from their roles as child heroes to whatever adult lives await them beyond the town that shaped their destinies. The peaceful land that Mike envisions serves as metaphor for the psychological state that awaits people who have faced their darkest fears and emerged victorious. The internal peace that comes from understanding that external circumstances cannot touch the essential bonds that connect people who have chosen to love each other, despite the risks and costs that such love inevitably entails. This destination exists not on any map, but in the hearts of those who have learned to value connection above safety and meaning above comfort. The evacuation of Hawkins that this vision implies would mark the town's final transformation from ordinary Midwestern community to legendary battleground, a place that future generations might visit to understand how a group of teenagers saved the world through the simple expedient of refusing to abandon each other, regardless of the supernatural forces arrayed against them. Their departure would complete the town's evolution from home to memorial, preserving its significance while releasing its residents from the burden of living in a place where reality and nightmare had become indistinguishable. The new generation that might inherit the responsibility for protecting reality from cosmic threats would face challenges that differ from those encountered by the original group. Their battles fought with the wisdom gained from studying the victories and defeats of their predecessors. The passing of heroic responsibility from one group to the next reflects the eternal nature of the struggle between order and chaos, suggesting that the work of protecting consciousness and individual identity can never be completed, but only continued by those brave enough to accept such responsibility. Eleven's potential loss of her psychic abilities through the final confrontation with Vecna represents both tragedy and liberation, the price paid for humanity's safety, transforming her from supernatural weapon back into ordinary teenager, free to pursue the normal life that her extraordinary circumstances have always denied her. This sacrifice of power for peace reflects mature understanding that abilities are valuable only insofar as they serve purposes larger than the individual who possesses them. The question of whether 11 could find happiness and purpose in a world where her unique capabilities were no longer needed or available tests her understanding of identity and self-worth, challenging her to discover value in herself that transcends her usefulness as humanity's protector against supernatural threats. Her journey toward normalcy, after years of being defined by her extraordinary nature, would parallel the experiences of soldiers returning from war, or athletes retiring from professional sports. The legacy that the group leaves behind extends beyond their specific victories against supernatural forces to encompass the model they provide for how ordinary people can respond to extraordinary challenges when supported by genuine friendship and sustained by authentic love. Their example demonstrates that heroism emerges not from special abilities or favorable circumstances, but from the simple choice to prioritize others' welfare above one's own comfort and safety. The memory of their achievements would serve future generations as proof that cosmic-level threats can be defeated through cooperation and sacrifice, that no enemy is so powerful that it cannot be overcome by people who refuse to surrender their humanity to fear or despair. This inspirational legacy transforms their individual struggles into universal symbols of hope that transcend the specific circumstances of their particular crisis. The genre shift from horror to hope that characterizes the series' evolution reflects the natural progression from fear-based motivation to love-based action that marks genuine heroic development, the movement away from fighting against enemies toward fighting for the people and principles that make existence meaningful rather than merely survivable. This transformation of tone and focus demonstrates how character growth changes not just individual perspectives, but the fundamental nature of the stories in which those characters participate. The conclusion that awaits these characters in whatever form it ultimately takes will need to honor both the darkness they have faced and the light they have chosen to follow, acknowledging the reality of loss and trauma, while affirming the possibility of healing and renewal that makes survival worthwhile rather than simply preferable to death. Their final scene around that basement table, or in whatever setting provides closure for their journey together, will mark not the end of their story, but the completion of their transformation from children playing at heroism to adults who have learned that true courage lies in the choice to love others despite the certainty that such love will eventually lead to loss. In those final moments, whether they involve dice rolling across familiar surfaces or feet walking toward horizons that promise new adventures in peaceful lands, these characters will carry within themselves the accumulated wisdom of everyone they have saved and everyone they have lost, their individual growth serving as monument to the power of friendship to transform ordinary people into the heroes that extraordinary circumstances demand. and that ordinary moments of grace make possible. The circle that brings them back to their beginning completes itself not through repetition but through recognition. The understanding that the games they played in innocence prepared them for realities they could never have imagined, and that the bonds they forged in play proved strong enough to withstand the kind of testing that breaks lesser connections and destroys weaker hearts. And so we close our journey through the labyrinth of possibilities that await in Stranger Things' final volume. Like the children of Hawkins, who found strength in friendship and love in the face of cosmic horror, we too find comfort in community, the shared experience of wondering, theorizing, and hoping together. Whether Vecna falls to the power of love, whether Will embraces his role as sorcerer, whether the Mind Flayer reveals its true cosmic horror, these questions fade into gentle whispers as sleep approaches. The beauty lies not in the answers, but in the dreaming, in the way stories become lullabies that carry us through the night. Rest now, knowing that somewhere in the spaces between sleeping and waking, between dimensions and dreams, the party continues their watch. Let the echoes of 80 seconds, synthesizers, and the warmth of found family guide you to peaceful slumber. The theories will wait for morning, but the love that binds these characters and us to them transcends time and space, providing comfort through the longest nights. Sweet dreams from Hawkins, where the extraordinary lives alongside the ordinary, and hope always finds a way.